Hello everybody, Carla here. Last week I rewatched season 3 of The Dragon Prince and have been on a Dragon Prince kick for the past few days. That kick has now expanded to watching my own videos I've done in the past about The Dragon Prince, plus other videos dealing with theories for the future, which I found really informative. As you know, I'm often not observant enough to come up with all of these complex theories on what's going to happen in the show, but I enjoy watching and hearing other people explaining their own theories, and many of them actually make a lot of sense to me, although I usually try to keep my expectations to a minimum so as to avoid disappointment if they don't come to fruition. One of the videos I watched that stuck with me, and you can click through to it on the card over here, was a video from Cartoon Universe discussing not necessarily a theory, but more of a character's current status, namely whether Claudia can be redeemed or if she's gone too far into the dark side for her to come back from all the terrible things she's done. This took me back to comments I've already made here about Claudia. I've made it no secret that I don't like Claudia, and I still feel that way after rewatching season 3. But I do wonder if maybe the show could ever change my mind on that if she's given a strong, believable redemption arc. Cartoon Universe's video also gave me some food for thought with the comparison of Claudia's predicament with that of Azula in Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is an apt comparison. But also, I like Azula way more than Claudia, which is kind of hilarious because Azula is psychotic from the get-go, while Claudia is introduced to us as a friendly character. It made me wonder why that is. I'm gonna spoil my conclusion right off the top. I do believe that Claudia can be redeemed. Will that make me like her as a character? I don't know. Maybe not. But I think she's not too far past the moral event horizon that the other characters, at least, wouldn't welcome her back to the light side. I do, however, think that it's going to take a lot for her to get to that point and for her redemption to feel earned. As much as we all love Zuko and Logan from Veronica Mars and Kenshin from Rurouni Kenshin, well-crafted redemption arcs are actually really difficult to pull off. While I trust the Dragon Prince writers and it seems like 4 seasons should be more than enough to get Claudia there, I'm inherently skeptical with these things, but I do not think it's impossible. So that's where I stand with Claudia as of right now. She can come into my good graces, but she's got to earn it. And until she does, I don't find her particularly agreeable as a character. One thing I have to make clear. My dislike of Claudia is not solely predicated by her use of dark magic. In the show, any use of dark magic is framed as a negative thing, perhaps even an evil thing. And while there are certain things Claudia does with dark magic that I find super questionable, I do not see dark magic used by humans as the black and white issue that the show would have us see it as. So that is just one of many aspects that color how I feel about Claudia, but it's not the whole of it. I will talk about that more in depth later on in the video, but I just wanted to make that clear from the beginning. So, let's start with part 1. Claudia, Azula, mental illness, and the scars of abuse. Before I go into this, I want to give you all a content warning. I will be talking rather superficially because I am not an expert on any of these themes, but just in case, about parental abuse, neglect, and mental illness. If I talk about these topics and it may harm you or trigger you in any way, maybe it would be better for you to skip to the next section at the timestamp you see here. But now let's get into it. It's very true that Claudia and Azula actually come from very similar backgrounds. Both born from privilege, talented in their specialty fields with less talented brothers, and both with parents that screwed them over in some pretty major ways. And when I say parents, I want to make it clear that I'm referring to both parents. in both sets. Yes, Viren and Ozai are very clearly evil pieces of shit who gaslit and brainwashed their children and made their love and pride in them conditional on how useful they could be to them. But the mothers in this equation are not exempt from guilt. This is very impactful to me because I hold parental abandonment to be one of the worst things a parent can do to a child short of direct abuse. I understand that there are circumstances where the parent might feel it is better for their child to be apart from them, and shows and movies usually go to great lengths to explain this so that the parent in question is not seen as a bad person, but rather seen as someone making the ultimate sacrifice. I get this. But for me, very personally, there are very, very few circumstances where this is actually a legitimate justification for a parent abandoning their child. It's not just these two either. Let's take Valka from How to Train Your Dragon, who is absolutely not a bad person and genuinely thought that living on her own apart from her son was the right thing to do. I understand all of this. And I don't dislike her. I'm actually quite glad that she made it back to Hiccup and sought to correct her mistake and form a supportive parental relationship with him. I like Valka. I will also never not have that pinprick of discomfort in my heart and a little voice in my head telling me she abandoned her child every time I think about her or see her on screen. It's a reaction I can't control. Even though intellectually I know she's not a bad person. We've never met Claudia's mother, but I feel much the same about Ursa. Glad she's back, but never fully 100% on board with her redemption. And that abandonment immediately engenders an initial level of sympathy for both Claudia and Azula that will be there regardless of how bad they become and how low they go. Being a victim of abuse and having to deal with trauma or depression can certainly explain why someone reacts to something the way they do. However, being a victim of abuse or being traumatized or depressed is not a justification to doing questionable or outright wrong things yourself. You guys know how I feel about Gendo Ikari from Evangelion. He's basically the scum of the earth as far as I'm concerned. And that doesn't only have to do with all the shit he pulls during the series. It started mainly with his own abandonment of his son before the series even started, and just compounded from there. You can't just dump your son on someone who won't even care for him properly, not contact him for ages, and then call him back 10 years later because now he's useful to you. It's just not okay, and I will never forgive him for that. Back in the days when I was still active in the Eva fandom, I got into many an argument with people who tried to convince me that Gendo's actions were understandable because he was depressed after the death of his wife, not ready to be a parent on his own, and Shinji would have been better off with someone else than having a father in that condition. Sorry, no. Depression is not an excuse for abandoning your child. Grief is not an excuse for abandoning your child. You don't feel ready to do it, you go see a therapist and work on that. You don't just dump your kid on someone else like they're a puppy you no longer want or can take care of. I'm quite certain any court in the world would find him guilty of parental abandonment because abuse and trauma and depression do not inherently make you unable to tell right from wrong. And your decisions more difficult? Sure. But plenty of people who have been abused or traumatized are suffering from depression out there, making the right decisions instead of crappy ones, even with all that weight on their shoulders. So, in that sense, while Claudia and Azula similarly had to deal with a lot of abuse and trauma and pain from their parents, and I feel for them, that does not mean they're exempt from judgment and consequence if they do something wrong. And they both do pretty terrible things. So where do the backgrounds differ? Well, I think it has to do with the fact that it was clear from the very beginning that there was something inherently wrong with Azula in terms of mental health. Yes, her parents' treatment of her clearly compounded things, but right from the get-go, she was presented pretty much as a psychopath. Someone who enjoyed seeing other people suffer, who thought seeking power made every awful behavior right, no matter how wrong it would seem to other people, who pathologically needed to put others down in order to feel good about herself. Certainly by the end of the series, it was fairly obvious that she was dealing with some kind of manic, dissociative episode far beyond your average depression. I'm no expert, but it seemed to me like perhaps some kind of schizophrenic disorder, maybe bipolarity or borderline somehow, but it was very clear to me that on top of how much Ozai and Ursa messed her up, there was something wrong with her mind, something that made it difficult for her to be able to tell the difference between right and wrong. And that for me is a different thing altogether than simply responding wrongly to trauma or abuse. That is definitely something that would make you unable to stand trial, for example. And however strange that this might sound, that makes it easier for me to be able to forgive Azula, because much of what she did was quite literally out of her control because she had a mental illness. The same is not true for Claudia. She's been similarly abused and brainwashed by her father and abandoned by her mother, but she does not suffer from a mental illness that renders her unable to tell right from wrong, or even that clouds that kind of judgment. Or, well, at least as far as I, as a non-expert, can see from her behavior on screen. She should have that nagging voice in her ear, telling her what you're doing isn't right. And I think she does, but she chooses to ignore it. And that is one of the things that make it hard for me to like her. Millions of people around the world suffer from abuse and neglect on a daily basis and don't go on to do terrible things. Soren went through the same thing she did, maybe even had it worse than she did, and he saw the light, so why can't she? I can't just give her a pass, and I feel that in my gut every time I see her do something that drives me nuts. And speaking of things that drive me nuts, it's time for part 2, Arrogance, Superiority Complex, and Interpersonal Relationships. One of the biggest reasons why Claudia rubs me the wrong way is the way she treats other people. Unlike Azula, she's not a mean person. She's actually quite pleasant with other people in a very genuine way, quirky in a manner that makes her fun to watch, and not at all stuck up in the way her position in the court would suggest. And I wonder, is that what actually makes it chafe all the more? Azula never pretends to be anything less than the prodigious princess of the Fire Nation who is superior than everyone around her in all aspects. Claudia is not like that at all, but there is no denying that there is something of an arrogance to her, particularly in the way she relates to Soren, which I suspect has a lot to do with her talent and her father's praise of her talent, much like Azula. Don't get me wrong, I believe Claudia cares about her brother very much. She's shown that several times in the show, and I think she's sincere about it. But there's no denying that there's a part of her that thinks that she's better than Soren. It's not something she brags about. It's not something she lords over him like Azula would over, well, everyone. Instead, it's a microaggression that she lets slip every once in a while, and for some reason, that makes it worse for me. Because of the aforementioned mental illness, it's not unthinkable for Azula to behave that way. But Claudia should recognize that such a thing can hurt people, hurt her brother, whom she loves. Instead, to her, it's almost like it's a simple fact, not something to celebrate necessarily, but she's internalized it so deeply that it doesn't give her pause. The sky is blue, magic is powerful, I'm smarter than Soren. And as someone who has a sibling who is completely different from me and who has to navigate the minefield of helping and supporting without making them feel lesser, it really irks me that Claudia hasn't clued into that yet. And then there's the inherent manipulativeness and arrogance of thinking she's doing the right thing simply because it makes sense to her. That's something she learned from Viren clearly, because he's much worse about it, but she has some of that in her too. Because when you think about it, Viren and Ozai are two evil bastards who are only in it for themselves, but they have very different methods. Where Ozai is a despot and a tyrant who rules by fear, Viren is a diplomat. He will use pretty words and logical arguments to convince you to do what he wants you to do, or at least confuse you enough that you don't impede him doing it. And the latter is almost worse for me, because it comes across as manipulative and duplicitous. At least Ozai doesn't pretend to be someone he isn't. At least Ozai doesn't try to pass himself off as a good guy. Azula doesn't either, for the most part, while Claudia has. That was the first time I started getting that icky feeling with Claudia, to be honest. I've never liked her as a character, as in she's never been one of my favorites, but I didn't have any negative feelings toward her in season 1, for example. It wasn't until season 2, Half Moon Lies to be precise, when I started feeling weirded out by her behavior. It was very clear to me in that episode that she was trying to use Callum's very obvious crush on her to get what she wanted from him. And that just feels super deceptive to me. Even when she tells him about his father's passing, which is arguably a good thing, she's doing it to get him to come back to Katalis with them. And that drives me nuts. Because this is someone she professes to care for, someone she claims is her friend. Azula doesn't do that, because Azula doesn't consider anyone a friend. She more than proved that during the show, and anyone who buys into her lies, Zuko, does so at their own peril. But the same is not true for Claudia, and she should know better. And she does know better, she just does it anyway. Which leads me to the last section of the essay, which is part 3. Okay, let's talk about the dark magic thing then. Dark magic in the Dragon Prince is a bit like blood bending is in Avatar, The Last Airbender. It's presented as this awful, horrific thing, and you kind of go with it at first, but then once you're done with the episodes and get a little bit of time to really think about it, you realize it's nowhere near as black and white as they're making it sound. Both bloodbending and dark magic can be used for terrible things, but they can also be used for good things. And also, both bloodbending and dark magic can come about from an ostensibly righteous motivation. This is exceedingly clear about dark magic after the flashback that opens season 3 of The Dragon Prince, where we see that at the very least, the person who introduced dark magic to the world of humans intended to use it to help people and save them from famine and disease, but the Zadians, in their arrogance and racism, would not allow that. But just because there are more positive and mostly harmless uses of dark magic, doesn't mean we can just ignore how it can be used for evil. Nuclear power is not bad in itself, but atomic bombs and nuclear waste are bad uses of it. Guns can be used for defense, but a lot of the time they're just used for violence. Callum killing a worm-type creature in order to use black magic to save the dragon Claudia and Soren had captured, and in the process save Rayla's life, I do not judge him for that at all, and I think it was wrong of Rayla to judge him for it. But the one analogy that comes up in video after video after video talking about this is that we can't say that dark magic is bad because it involves killing magical creatures, while we kill animals in order to eat meat. And while it is true that we can't say dark magic is bad just from the premise that it is based around killing magical creatures, any magical creatures, I also don't think the analogy is very fitting. Killing animals for sustenance is not the problem, because animals kill for sustenance too. Do you think Zadian dragons are vegetarian? I'm willing to bet they're not. They probably eat other magical creatures. There's a food chain in Savia just as much as there is in the human kingdoms, and just as much as there is in the real world. So it can't come down to just never killing any living creature ever. It's about how you kill them and why. I'm not a vegetarian in any sense of the word, but I understand their objections, and I know that while there are some people out there who completely oppose eating animals in any way, what the majority of vegetarians oppose is the way our capitalist society has mercantilized sustenance based on animals, factory farming, unnecessary cruelty, the toll it's having on the environment, among other factors. Which I do agree with, even though I still eat meat. It's why I'm so enthusiastic about things such as lab-grown meat, which would involve a lot less cruelty while not completely changing the way humans have accrued their sustenance since they appeared on Earth. It should be noticed also that even in the topic of sustenance, we don't see all animals the same way. Most people wouldn't bat an eye at eating meat from a cow or chicken if the cruelty and other negative aspects weren't an issue. But in many places, it's inconceivable to do the same with, say, a dog or a cat. That's just animal cruelty, no matter how you look at it. But dark magic is not about sustenance, and it does not carry the same motivation in all cases. If I kill a mosquito or a cockroach in my home, it would ostensibly be for health reasons, not because I'm going to use their carcass to get something for myself. And I know that me killing a few hundred mosquitoes or cockroaches throughout my lifetime is not going to reduce their numbers by much. But certain animal killings, such as in bullfighting or poaching elephants for their ivory, are purely for entertainment or vanity, and are almost universally seen as a very negative thing. In certain cases, dark magic is more like that, and those should absolutely be condemned. Like, say, when you bring down a dragon and decide to take it back home with you so you can use it for parts. So, as I said earlier, I do not judge Claudia negatively simply because she uses dark magic. I do, however, judge her for how she uses dark magic and why. See, I'm a scientist, and for me, as for Claudia clearly, dark magic is more along the lines of a science. And even in real life, we do experiment on animals, and there's a whole balancing act that comes along with that. And that's where dark magic and science differ, I guess. In science, in every single situation, every single specific scientific association, every single institution, every single scientific board, every country has very well defined ethics rules that every researcher must follow regarding animal experimentation. You can't just treat animals however you please, or you'll be swiftly discredited. That's the real difference with dark magic for me. That they assume that just because it's okay to do some things with black magic, that means that it's okay to do anything with black magic. And that is just not right, particularly in a world where many of the creatures you're using as ingredients in your research are highly intelligent to the point where they are very clearly able to object to such treatment. And the ethical guidelines are usually very well defined. I'm doing a PhD, and while mine doesn't involve any animal research, I do know that students whose research does are required to detail their intended research to an animal research ethics panel that has to approve of their methodology before any title or grant can be awarded for the project. I was looking up some ethical guidelines just on Google, it's easy to find, and I came across two that I thought were very clear, so I will use them as an example. First, from the Norwegian Regional Committees for Research Ethics, they specify that researchers must ensure that the animal's dignity is respected. That means the researcher must ensure that the animals are well cared for during the project and that they're not treated cruelly. Are dark mages doing this? Seems to me, at least from those we've seen, that they just collect magical creatures and store them in jars. We don't even really see them feed them at any point. The second guideline is that the researcher should consider other options if possible. Do not use animals in your research if you can achieve your goal in other ways. Say, for example, when making pancakes. The third guideline is proportionality. If the animal will suffer pain or other suffering, this must be proportional to the benefit obtained from it, be it to humans, other animals, or the environment. Again, don't kill a living creature just because you want to make fluffier pancakes. The fourth tenet is considering reducing the number of animals you experiment on. Again, I don't think dark mages even consider this, as they're seen collecting these magical creatures or parts of magical creatures just to have them at hand when they need them. Fifth is minimizing the risk of suffering, which, considering most of the dark magic spells involve outright killing magical creatures, I don't think this is something that's really crossed their minds. The sixth and seventh principles are respect for maintaining biodiversity and habitats, aka do not experiment on rare or endangered species or alter their habitat unless absolutely necessary. And if you do, you have to be careful that you don't cause them to go extinct. Considering that some of the creatures Viren and company power their dark magic with are dragons and unicorns, I'm gonna go ahead and say this isn't a priority for them. The eighth guideline is to be open with your data and results so that other researchers don't need to do the same research all over again later. I have no idea if this is followed in dark magic, though they do seem to have instructional books about it, I guess, if that counts. The ninth tenet is that researchers are required to be experts on the animals they're handling. As far as I understand, dark mages only know superficial information about the creatures they're using in their spells, which could have unintended consequences. A second set of guidelines, this time from the NIH, the National Institutes of Health in the United States, is very similar. It states that before any research is done, it must have a stated purpose that is of sufficient potential significance to justify the use of animals. It should also be designed so that the minimum necessary number of animals is used, but complete enough that it doesn't need to be repeated in the future. Scientists should be trained in the care, maintenance, and handling of the species being studied, and pain management must be refined. Anesthetics and analgesics must be applied where possible. Animals must be kept in good conditions and properly cared for to the point of considering enriching their environment. This must all also be very closely supervised by the corresponding institution. You can find links to these two guidelines in the description below if you'd like to read them yourself, but these are just two of the many ethical guidelines out there for scientists to follow when it comes to treatment and handling of animals for research purposes. We do this because we've learned by now that even if humans are the most evolved creature on Earth and we're ostensibly doing this type of research for the right reasons, we cannot just dismiss the dignity and well-being of other creatures based on the idea that they're less than us. It sounds cheesy, but there is a very delicate balance in the world, and every living creature is an important part of that balance. Our actions as scientists have consequences, and it has taken thousands of years for us to understand this. But now we know, and science as a discipline has taken steps to ensure that we limit those consequences as much as possible. Dark mages, as far as I can see, have not come to the conclusion yet. But Carla, I hear you say, the Dragon Prince is a medieval fantasy show. Of course they wouldn't have ethics rules for this kind of thing yet. You can't judge them based on modern standards. Okay, I'll give you that it probably hasn't been codified yet. But just because there isn't a document somewhere detailing rules for when dark mages can and can't use dark magic, doesn't mean that people don't know that it's wrong. It's like saying you can't judge people in the 1800s for supporting slavery because they were men of their time, when there were plenty of people during that time who recognized slavery as evil. In fact, I posit to you that the show very explicitly gave us a basic set of ethics rules regarding the use of magical creatures in dark magic. And it happened on episode 205, Breaking the Seal, when Queen Sarai, absolute legend that she is, asks her husband these sharp questions in regards to the magma creature.
Is it intelligent? Does it think? Does it feel? Does it have a family? Then is it the last of its kind?
That doesn't cover all the considerations touched upon in the guidelines I talked about earlier, but it's a good start. And it shows that it's justified because it was an ancient, less advanced time period is not a good excuse. Because Queen Sarai cannot be the only person in the entire world who is thinking this way. No, breaking ethics rules on animal research does not immediately make someone evil or a criminal, but it can expose you as careless or even uncaring, depending on the extent of the infringement. It should be observed on a case-by-case basis. Similarly with Claudia, I don't think being careless about the lives of magical creatures she's using to fuel her dark magic is necessarily evil. But it does reaffirm her internalized feelings of superiority, arrogance, occasional callousness, and the idea that she thinks the ends justify the means, as I touched upon in the first two parts of this essay. Does killing magical creatures to make fluffy pancakes make her evil? No. It seems shallow for sure, and the benefit is not proportional to the suffering incurred, but I believe she mentions at some point that she used an insect of some kind for it, and there are probably billions of those crawling around, that it's not a devastating blow for her to kill a few of them for some dumb reason. Heck, even the thing with the deer in the season 2 finale didn't strike me as some evil deed. Personally, I consider the life of a deer to be a fair trait to cure paralysis, and I think that many people would agree. What bothered me about that entire deer episode was not her killing the deer, it was her lying to Ezran about it. She clearly felt that she was doing something wrong, or she would have told him the truth, and she still went through with it without making any sort of amend for it. She just did it because she could, because she had the need, without taking into account who she was hurting. Not just the deer, but Ezran too. Taking a live dragon back to Katalis so she can use it for parts, however, outright wrong, if you ask me. Attempting to kidnap the dragon prince and take it back to her father, ostensibly so he can kill the creature, outright wrong. Not objecting to whatever it was that her father was doing to the soldiers in the human kingdoms, outright wrong. Not even being curious about where her father got such power, outright wrong. Using that power to attack people she used to consider her friends and to trick and possibly traumatize her brother for life, outright wrong and straight up despicable. And of course, letting someone die or possibly outright murdering someone in order to bring her father back to life, wrong, 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 and arguably outright evil. In conclusion, if you ask me, Claudia is already at the place where any normal character has already crossed the moral event horizon. The only reason really that I'm still willing to give her the chance to be redeemed is because I think that would mean a lot for Soren and Callum and Ezran, if it's genuine and done right. I like them, so I want them to be happy, and I know that Claudia coming back to the side of good would make them happy. If I were looking at her isolated from every other character arc, I would probably say she's irredeemable, but because of her behavior outside of dark magic, just as much as for her use of dark magic. But she's not an island, and I think that tips the scale for me, at least for the moment. It will heavily depend on how low she goes over the next few seasons, and there are things I can't forgive, no matter how well they're written. So it's on the writer's court now. This is a children's show, so I don't think this is likely, but it might come to a point where her only possible redemption is in death. It's been known to happen. Either way, this is just the way I see it, and I'm coming at this from a very specific point of view, colored by my own personal and professional experience. Do you feel about Claudia the same way I do? Or do you like her? Do you think she can be redeemed, and do you want that to happen? Let me know in a comment, because I'm super curious as to what people think about this. While you're there, give me a thumbs up if you like my video, and subscribe to my channel if you like my stuff. It really does help me a lot with these silly YouTube algorithms. In the meantime, you can find me on social media. I am on Twitter and Instagram at girlsareweird with underscores between the words, and I am on Tumblr at girlsareweird with hyphens between the words. You can also follow my fandom-only Twitter at FreakingNarnia_. You can find a Facebook page for this vlog at facebook.com/FreakingNarnia. And as usual, be sure to visit my main webpage at FreakingNarnia.com. All my videos are there, so you can check it out in case you missed anything. Also, remember that I have a Redbubble store where I make art based on my favorite quotes from my favorite fandoms, which you can then print on different kinds of merch such as t-shirts, coffee cups, computer covers, and the like. So be sure to stop by and maybe purchase something if you're in the mood. It really does help me a lot. You can also sign up for my Patreon, where you'll be able to get these talks from Freaking Narnia episodes on podcast form on the exact same day they go up on YouTube. So if podcasts are more your jam, you know what to do. And that's about it from me today. I will see you all next time with another video from all the way in Freaking Narnia. Bye! And public service announcement, please make your fluffy pancakes the old-fashioned way. For the often, but something as someone making the 1800s the way I, and as usual, where you can